Guys, it's Mr. Sisson, and we are going to work today on our third benchmark. And I'm going to get down there eventually. And that is to successfully narrow our topic. And that means we're going to take whatever your topic was that was pretty big. Some of yours may be larger than mine. The one that got approved for me by myself is Chester A. Arthur. That doesn't really tell me anything about conflict and compromise. That just says, hey, Chester A. Arthur, that's my topic. Yours might be something like the Battle of Gettysburg, or the 1920s, or Prohibition, or civil service reform, like me, or women's rights, or whatever. It's going to be a really big thing. Even if it's a person, it's still too big. If it's like Susan B. Anthony, or Abraham Lincoln, or whatever, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, it's still too big. We want to make it narrower. So we're going to talk through these directions, and then I'm going to work through this just for a little bit. We're going to use a source and see what kind of headway we can make. So your approved topic is just a beginning point for your NHD work. Your next task is to narrow your topic. This means focusing on a specific aspect or part of an event or a person's life. To do that, you need to ask specific questions about your topic. Narrow topics lurk in your answers to the questions below. That means every answer that I have for these questions down here could be the direction that I take my whole project. Narrow topics lurk in your answers to the questions below. Your task is to find them. Ask questions about the answers to your questions. So I'm asking questions of my questions. How did so-and-so get involved in this conflict? So-and-so caused the main conflict. What caused it? So if the firing of the shots on Fort Sumter caused the Civil War, what caused the firing of the shots on Fort Sumter? Those are the types of questions that you want to have. So here are the questions that we're dealing with. Who were the important people involved? What smaller events occurred within the larger topics? What conflicts occurred within the larger topic? So we got small events that may not necessarily be conflicts or compromises, but they seem significant. But then what conflicts occurred? And what compromises occurred within the larger topic, and how did it develop over time? So hopefully we'll move kind of quickly. I found a source in my Google research. I'm going to show you how I found it, though. In my very advanced Google research, remember we're pretty early on in this our research, so we're using these really basic sources. Like history.com would not be one of your main sources if you want to really advance. But it's helpful to find out some of this basic information. Chester A. Arthur, U.S. presidents. Here's the one I wanted to look at, the one from the Miller Center. Chester A. Arthur, campaigns and elections. All right, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read through, and we're going to watch for answers to some of those questions that we have. The first one, people. I'm only going to write down people that I see, if I see their names pop up a few different times. Because what's going to happen if I don't, I'm going to be writing down names of people that might only be mentioned once. So my bare minimum, I've got to see someone's name twice in this article before I think they're critical enough to the story to write down. So, campaign and election of 1880. Since President Rutherford B. Hayes had declared that he was only going to serve one term, the 1880 election was wide open. Party boss Roscoe Conkling's candidate, former President Ulysses S. Grant, and Senator James G. Blaine were the leading rivals at the Republican nominating convention. Blaine led the half-breed Republican, so I'm going to write James G. Blaine because he seems significant, but we'll get to the end before we do that. Led the half-breed Republican faction that struggled against Conkling's stalwarts faction for control of their party. So I'm going to write down both those guys' names, and I'm going to write down the groups they're a part of, half-breed Republicans and stalwart Republicans. On the 36th ballot, a compromise deal was made, and the Republicans rallied behind a political moderate, James Garfield of Ohio. Garfield led the Republican minority in the House of Representatives, and just prior to the convention had been elected by the Ohio legislature to the United States Senate. Okay, so let's go back to this. Who were the important people? Let's see. We had James G. Blaine. We had Roscoe Conkling. We had stalwart Republicans, and we had half-breed Republicans. We also had basic ones. I don't know why I didn't write these earlier. Chester A. Arthur, and we had James Garfield. What were smaller events occurred within the larger topics? What conflicts, compromises? We just saw a compromise there, and that was James Garfield, take that bold off. James Garfield was a compromise candidate for the Republican nomination. There were two other guys. James G. Blaine and Ulysses S. Grant were the two main guys, but the two sides couldn't agree. So James Garfield, his name was a compromise. We can both agree on Garfield. Okay, so there we go. Let's keep going. Because of the machinations, I don't think I can say, I think I'm incapable of saying that word correctly, but it means like the doings of some conquering lieutenants who acted without the knowledge of their boss, Arthur was sounded out or asked for the vice presidential slot. Garfield reluctantly acceded or agreed to Arthur's nomination as he realized how crucial the New York machine was to his election. That's the whole boss system that we kind of talked about in the last video. Conkling urged Arthur to reject the nomination, believing that Garfield was bound to be defeated at the polls, but his trusted lieutenant was both tempted and pleased by the prospect. In spite of Conkling's urgings, Arthur accepted, declaring that the office of the vice president is a great honor than I ever dreamed of attaining. The Democrats nominated General William S. Hancock, big Civil War guy, of Pennsylvania, a hero of Gettysburg, as their presidential candidate, and William H. English, former congressman from Indiana, as his running mate. Another Civil War general, James B. Weaver, ran on the Greenback Labor ticket. Weaver, running on soft money platform, won over 300,000 popular votes, but no electoral college delegates. So you may notice I saw a lot of names in there. None of them really seemed that critical to Chester Arthur, who at least for right now is my main focus. I don't know if I'm going to see something that might change my mind, but that's what I want to focus on. So I'm not going to talk about that, but were there any smaller events? Well, there is one that I think is kind of interesting, and that is Conkling encouraged Arthur to, to reject the vice presidential nomination, but Arthur didn't. Conkling thought Garfield would lose. Okay. All right, we'll keep going. Arthur actively campaigned during the election, coordinating mass meetings and taking charge of tours made by Grant, that's Ulysses S. Grant, so I might throw him on there, and Conkling in the Midwest. In fact, he might have been the first advanced man in American politics. Furthermore, as chairman of the New York State Republican Committee, he assessed city, state, and federal employees for 3% of their annual salary. Such efforts helped Garfield win the presidency, and there was much talk in the air, although never proved, that Arthur had schemed to buy votes for Garfield in the crucial swing state of Indiana. In the election, the Garfield-Arthur ticket beat the Democrats in the popular vote by less than 0.1%, but dominated the Electoral College. Okay. Any events? Well, Arthur was accused of buying votes in Indiana. That means paying people to vote for Garfield, and Garfield won the election even though the popular vote was close. Okay, got a couple more, but I don't know if we see anything else there. After the election, Arthur, often portrayed as under Conkling's control, openly broke with the president. This means he disagreed with Garfield. Acting on the advice of James G. Blaine, whom he had appointed Secretary of State, so that he is James Garfield, Garfield moved to destroy Conkling's power once and for all by appointing William H. Robertson for the collectorship of the Port of New York. Robertson, President pro tem of the New York Senate, was a strong half-breed. Needless to say, in the days before Garfield's assassination, Garfield and Arthur shared a mutual animosity. That means they didn't like each other. For Arthur remained firmly in the stalwart camp. So Garfield, half-breed, Arthur, stalwart. Conkling resigned from the Senate in protest, and it looked as though Arthur would become a powerless figurehead in the Garfield administration. No power for Arthur. However, Garfield's assassination in July of 1881 left Arthur far from powerless. On September 19th, Chester Allen Arthur became the 21st President of the United States. All right, so let's go. There's a whole lot that just happened right there. What conflicts occurred? Arthur was a stalwart and Garfield a half-breed, and they disagreed strongly. didn't really tell me what, so I'll figure out what that's all about. What's another conflict? Well, James Garfield was assassinated. And Arthur became president. What smaller events occurred? Any compromises that occurred yet? I don't know. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Let's just move on. I don't see anything else there. It does seem like William H. Robertson's being appointed to the collectorship of New York is a big deal. So that's not really a compromise, but I'm going to put that up here. William H. Robertson's appointment to be the collector of the state of New York. I'm going to put his name up here too. And I think Ulysses S. Grant will put him up there too, even though I don't think we're not going to see him much more. Okay, here we go. Last paragraph. As Arthur's term in office came to a close, he made little effort to seek a second term. In early October 1882, he had fallen ill with Bright's disease, a fatal kidney ailment. His symptoms included inertness, mental depression, and spasmodic nausea. That doesn't sound fun. But the public was never aware of his condition. Since Arthur had converted to political form once he assumed office, his former stalwart allies, including Grant and Conkling, opposed his nomination. Well, I have no idea what that means, but that sounds pretty interesting. That by the end of his term, the stalwarts are opposed to Arthur, who was a stalwart. So I'm gonna put that down here. The end of his term, the stalwarts opposed Arthur's re-election. Well, that's interesting, because what did he do? It says something about Arthur had converted to political form. I don't know what that means, but whatever it was, it went from him being a firm stalwart and Conkling loving him to them opposing him. That seems interesting. Conversely, reformers remained suspicious, for certain appointments, such as the Secretary of the Navy, smacked of the old spoils system. Hence, at the 1884 Republican nominating convention, Arthur lost his bid for the party's nomination to Blaine on the 4th ballot. So, sounds like by the end of his term, neither side liked him. By the end of his term, neither the stalwarts or half-breeds liked Arthur. I just called him Arthur. I'm going to put, interesting. That sounds like something that I might need to dig into. How'd the topic develop? Well, this I can probably take from here. And I might even sum this up. I might say, Chester A. Arthur was appointed wasn't really appointed, was nominated for the vice presidency by Roscoe Conkling and the stalwart Republican faction. Once he became president, he did things that they did not like, and by the end of his term, they didn't support him. So, as you can see, I just spent about, probably 15 minutes, 14 minutes doing this, and this is the information I've got. And if I'm looking at this now, remember, it's conflict and compromise. I see plenty of conflicts here, right? Arthur and Garfield were in conflict. Garfield's assassination. Stalwarts opposed Arthur's re-election. There's conflict there. Neither of them liked him. And then compromises. Garfield was a compromise candidate for the Republican nomination. What I would be interesting to see, and what I would be researching now, is what did Arthur do to make the stalwarts not like him? So, I'm just going to show you what I would type in. I don't know how this is going to turn out, Arthur do that made the stalwarts oppose him? And I can use some of these things, like Wikipedia early on, but eventually I would move on from it. Let's see anyways, this is the thing I would be looking for now. I would be looking specifically for whatever happened that made the stalwarts oppose Chester A. Arthur.